Okay, let's see how so far we can continue this chain of reasoning and put it in a favorable light. Um, so, one question I see here is the difficulty where taking the side of the dwarf, which stays with the re, um, mercenary use of reasoning. Let's say reason is never the stars in the night sky, which provide the true knowledge about how everything should be, I think is a more uh, appropriate phrase than to merely say the ordering of the political life or something like that. Um, from this side, where we begin to gain certain certainties by um, the denial of human motives because we're in the subhuman. Um, Here we would seem to be blind in decisive areas, um, and it's hard to see why, if we're moving in the so-called cunning of reason, so that history is, in Zizek's Hegelian side at least, or that history is accomplishing its aims, although it doesn't foresee what it's doing, but it's just doing them blindly. Um, so Zizek wants to say this excludes the human, um, and the human has a different realm, and it seems like this constantly drives us more and more to treat ourselves as the blind realm and to lower the claim of the human further from the light of the sun of the good, or the light of some kind of claim to sufficient reason. Um, Here it's strange because in the class theory, so if you flip it over to Zizek's Marxism and then you're thinking of the class theory, that's all about human beings and human actions. And it seems that one is then compelled to say human beings and human actions themselves are more the blind matter, so that humans themselves aren't really humans. As it turns out, they're subhuman. So it's sort of like the Nietzschean move, although it doesn't go to the will, but it rather goes to this subhuman processes, which then we can somehow satisfy ourselves from um, not trying to influence them too much. It does seem, and then that sounds almost like Hayek or something, or um, stand back and let the process happen and don't interfere with it. On the other hand, you can pump up the class struggle side and the human side and say, um, Zizek likes to quote Rosa Luxemburg to say it's somebody who starts an unsuccessful revolution and thereby is, I mean, this is just a gross paraphrase, but it's something like that, but thereby um, produces the situation where a successful rebellion can happen later on. Um, Somehow the conditions can be set in motion within the human sphere. So is it so? It seems like the weight of Zizek is towards relinquishing more to the blind nature. So, in fact, maybe that's the ambiguity in Zizek's whole position, but that's the way I often read it, especially with comments like that if his son were to die, um, and then he found out the son had no pain, he would be have absolutely no emotional reaction to that. Um, that would be fine. He'd treat it rationally, and then he'd say, "Okay, fine, let's go out to have a nice dinner." Um, and he and this, so you could see how, in that sense, the whole character of life would be changed if that became um, uh, the way the world was um, lived, or the way things were. Um, if everyone were like that and to take that attitude and to live that way, at least to some extent, or at least that became somehow prevalent and visible in a whole people. Um, it does seem that's, in some sense, drawing things into this darkness of the material just moving on its own and then shaving off the human being. So I would say that's one concern I have. The chick gives this impression of being more like the dwarf that can't see the stars, although clearly he doesn't give up the stars, but he weights himself on the side of the blindness. Um, so, I mean, in contradistinction to that, I think the more sane view, we should remember on a similar issue, the view of Pascal, who said we don't know enough to be dogmatists, and we know too much to be skeptics. Um, it's these views are both very strong, and one can float between them. Whereas on the same score with the question of it's almost the same issue, you see, because the question would be, can we really have sufficient reason? Is the question, can there really be a dogma which is not, as we understand it now, a pejorative, or the term would not have a pejorative character, but it would be a liberation, because it would tell us um, a way to live that was, I mean, strictly speaking, the perfect way to live. But one could almost imagine some kind of compromise where it was, although we would probably get into some kind of difficulty with that. But I could almost imagine a compromise where it would simply mean everyone every day would be thrilled and they genuinely say this is all great, with veracity. Something along those lines. Life would simply run without a hitch, and also with uh, enormous joy and ease for everyone. But if that cannot be believed in, does it mean one still, you see, once you deny it altogether, it kind of forces one into the view that the subhuman ought to win, and ought to we ought to follow the the blind forces. So something like a Manichaean view does seem to cast some light on even thinkers that are thinking in um, views which are in totally different vistas and in different countries than the places where these post-Platonic early centuries of Christianity views um, of the Manichae, of the Neoplatonist, were hatched out. So those are just some reflections on the second line of the short essay on the theme of the return of the stray.